Well, hello, everybody. Hello, Firearms Legal Protection family. Thank you for joining us again for another webinar tonight. It's always good that we have these just to kind of hop in and learn something. I feel like this whole realm of legal protection, self-defense, having some sort of insurance or coverage for personal protection can get so complicated and can get so nuanced. So that's why we do all these webinars, just to take a particular topic and take a deeper dive and just look at one or two specific things and just learn more about them. So I'm already seeing some comments from people tuning in on YouTube, people tuning in on Facebook. Great to see everybody joining in. Looks like somebody's driving home. We'll be listening only, so drive safe. Glad to hear people listening. Just be safe wherever you are. Looks like we're seeing people from Houston, Texas, people all over the country tonight. So the topic for tonight is going to be kind of a split topic. We're going to be discussing expungements, which is an important issue, and it's actually a benefit that Firearms Legal Protection added about a year and a half ago. A lot of other services weren't providing anything related to expungements, and it's really important because it's something that we cover and that we can help with after there's been an incident to make sure that you're made whole and that your legal record is clean. Then we're also going to be talking about background checks. So very complicated legal topics that are very important for both self-defense and legal protection and the processes of owning and purchasing a firearm as well. So to help us out on these topics tonight, we have Ramy Hijazi from Detroit, Michigan. He went to Wayne State Law School and he's class of 2018, opened Point Blank Firearms in March of 2021. And he's got a legal practice in criminal law and in firearm rights. So we've got the perfect man for the job this evening to tell us all about expungements and background checks and how this is important to us as gun owners and just what we need to know related to these. So welcome to the show. Glad to have you and glad to have you just educating us on all this stuff.
Thank you, Plenty. I appreciate it. Yeah, so when I first opened Point Blank Firearms, I definitely noticed a problem. So many people were getting denied and had no clue what was going on. I've heard people tell me, I promise there's nothing on my record. What are my options? Who can I speak to? And so being a new graduate from law school and opening up Point Blank Firearms kind of put me in a very unique situation. I saw a problem and addressed it. Ended up creating a company called firearmsappeal.com. It's under the umbrella of my law firm, Hijazi Legal Consulting. And my goal really was to provide clarity in the whole process. So I guess we can move into the slides. Yeah, so we'll move right into the juicy stuff. So the topic today is expungements and background checks. So it's important to understand that your background check is contingent on your criminal record. So when you apply for a firearm and you're asking the federal government whether you can lawfully own a firearm, criminal histories will definitely get in your way. If you have a disqualifying criminal record, then NICS, if your state participates in it, will deny you and you cannot get a firearm. That is until, if you have the opportunity to expunge that crime, if a certain amount of criteria are met, depending on your state and depending on the type of charge. And so an expungement really is bifurcated into two types of crimes. You guys got to think about it this way. There's federal crimes and then there's state crimes. A federal crime, unfortunately, Congress has not paved an easy path to expungement. So that means really the only way to get something off your record is to ask the President of the United States to take it off, to seal it. Congress has made it clear that they're not interested in expunging federal crimes. So if you committed a federal crime that prohibits you from owning a firearm, very likely you're not going to get a president's signature to seal that document. If it's a state crime, you got to ask whether your state allows, or whatever state the crime was committed in, whether they allow it to be expunged. And so, for example, in Michigan, we have more of a lenient expungement law. So more recently, in the last few weeks, Michigan went to automatic expungement. So that means if you're eligible, and once the criteria is met, the state will automatically forward the paperwork and your criminal history will be sealed. That's very nice. In my opinion, Not good for lawyers, lot of money lost there, but it's definitely very, very good for the public. Just a few days ago, they switched that on, and I think in the first day, if I remember correctly, 1 million records were sealed and expunged. That's huge. And so you have to ask whether first your state will expunge that crime. So I recommend if there was a crime committed at some point, I'm certain you had a lawyer. I would consult that lawyer for sure. Tell them, hey, my name is X, Y, and Z. You represented me at some point. I want to know whether I'm eligible for expungement. That's going to be your easiest route. If your lawyer is no longer there, then I recommend you gather all your paperwork and consult somebody who is an expert in expungements. And so I hope that makes sense. It's not clear, if someone were to ask me later on in the chat, like, I committed X and Y crime, am I eligible to be expunged? Unfortunately, they don't write the laws so easily. So it does get very complicated, and it's very state dependent. So I am licensed to practice in the state of Michigan, so I'm more adapt to Michigan laws naturally, obviously, and I don't know other state laws to be able to provide anybody with any not legal advice, but any way of knowing what to do moving forward. So that's why I recommend really reach out to that lawyer that helped you out on the case. If you didn't have a lawyer, find someone that does do expungements. I guess that will segue into our next topic is what is NICS? NICS is our U.S. federal government funded criminal background check system. Very big building located somewhere in the United States with many, many employees. When FFLs or federal firearm licensees submit backgrounds, first we have to ask whether the state actually participates in the background check system. So most states do. I could see at this map that I'm looking at, NICS participation map. You can all find that on Google. I could see just offhand, there's 10 or 11 states that do not participate in NICS. They use their own systems. They've created a fund and created something on their own. California, Florida, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Illinois, Tennessee, Virginia, Pennsylvania. Those are just some states that do not participate in NICS. So firearm stores in those states will actually go through the state system. So I know what I know through NICS. So in Michigan and most other states, we use NICS. So NICS is a system that has moved to become electronic. So a long time ago, you used to have to pick up the phone, speak to somebody, relay your information over them, and then be on hold until a decision comes out. At some point in the last 15 years or so, they've made it electronic. So now what we do is you fill out a 4473, we electronically submit it. The moment we hit submit, the system can actually give us three possible outcomes. Outcome number one, proceed. Everybody's happy. The transaction can move forward. Deny is the second one, or a delay. Most people tend to fall in the delay category. Usually that means, it doesn't necessarily mean you have anything on your criminal record. Usually that means that someone with a similar name might have a criminal record, and basically the federal government needs at least 3 or at most 3 business days to render a decision. So most people fall in that category. Delay does not necessarily mean anything bad. There is a avenue that you can take if you do always get that delay status. I know it can be annoying because you have to wait a certain amount of days before you can get your firearm. There is actually an avenue for you to almost appeal that and prove to the government that you should be getting instant proceeds. So that's an option for everybody. Do know, though, that if you did get a delay, the government has 3 business days starting from the day after you submit your application. So be careful how you count those days. So if I were to submit today, which is Thursday, the government will have until Monday to render a decision. So today doesn't count. I'm sorry, that would be Tuesday. So today doesn't count. Tomorrow is your first business day. Monday would be your second. Tuesday would be your third. They got 3 full days to make a decision. And usually what happens on the FFL side, sometime in those 3 days, we get the decision. And most likely than not, it's usually a proceed. Nix is pretty good about having the disqualifying information, but I do tread with caution there. There is a fair number of people who go in delay status and ultimately get denied. Now, if you're one of those people, you would have to ask yourself, are you in a category of a person that's prohibited from owning a firearm? If it turns out you're not, I would say 9.9 out of 10 times it's simple misidentification. So if you have a common name, let's just say your name is Brian Smith, and you apply to get a firearm, I recommend, even though it's optional, you put your social security number down on your 4473. That narrows the possibility that you will be misidentified. Unfortunately, the federal government has made it pretty difficult. If you are misidentified and you are lawfully allowed to own a firearm, you have to go through the appeal or challenge process, which is the next point I'm going to get into here. So, appeal and challenge are very two different beasts. So, an appeal is an overhaul of your entire background and name. A challenge is just one transaction. So, if you have two methods, appeal and challenge, you got to look at the pros and cons. Well, a challenge, think of it as one transaction. So if you ask the federal government to review and challenge your decision, they're going to cover that one firearm basically for you. So they would, if it turns out that they misidentified you, they would send you a letter in the mail and say, hey, this one transaction is allowed to go through. The pro of going through that method is that it takes only 45 days typically. If you want to go through an appeal is a totally different thing. That's asking the government to do the full overhaul on your name, where they assign an officer to investigate and make sure and really understand why you were getting denied in the first place. Turns out that they made a mistake. Well, at that point, they're going to issue you a special, unique identifying PIN number that you're going to slap on every single application. The moment you submit your 4473 and put that UPIN number in, I believe it's question 17, but don't quote me on that. It's somewhere around there. It asks for UPIN, UPIN. The moment you throw that number inside your 4473, the federal government knows there was an open appeal. A decision was made. So at that point, when Nix receives the background check, they're able to pull the UPIN file, read through it very quickly, and then make sure there are no new crimes committed. So typically when you throw a UPIN number, it'd be a matter of minutes before you'll see that approval come through. So it can be daunting to wait that long. But that's why the government created the two methods there, the appeal versus the challenge. So think of the challenge, like usually people in certain situations arise where you need a firearm really quick. Maybe somebody's threatening you, you're uneasy about your family, high crime recently. The challenge is there for you so that way you could go get that firearm. So you have to go take care of that. But if you are getting denied and you are getting delayed and you're not happy about the delay, you could appeal your name and, again, get that UPIN issued to you. So that will narrow out misidentifications and put you where you need to be. So we offer those services. It's not the easiest thing to do, so it is pretty challenging. They ask some very specific questions, and also they require you to send in a new set of fingerprints. It has to go on a certain form. Most people call me and tell me, hey, this is what's happening. I need to hire someone. Now, we offer the service for $1,000. So that would allow you to go through that 9-month process without necessarily having to go through the mud and do it yourself. Most people, though, they try it on their own and get bogged down. Unfortunately, it's not the most straightforward thing. We've been doing it for so long that we've become very quick and adapt. I have noticed, though, still the government is taking around 9 months. I would say it's come down a substantial amount since the height of COVID. At one point, when we first opened the store in 2021, it was taking pretty long, probably closer to 14 months or 15 months. We're back down to 9 months. I heard at one point they were overhauling on those appeals in as little as 3 or 4 months. I hope one day they can do that, but I do know they are very bogged down. So NICS is understaffed. Unfortunately, there's not much we could do about it other than complain to our government, and they have so much work to do, and we have to pay the burden, unfortunately. So, at this point, I'll give it away to you, Bunny, if you would like to go ahead and ask any questions or.
Yeah, I think that was great info, and I learned a lot. And even the U pin was something that was very new to me. So it was actually last weekend I was at the NRA trade show, and I was purchasing a silencer, and I'm really excited to have a shusher device and not make my hearing any worse than it already is. And that's when they asked me if I had a U pin, and I was like, don't know what that is. Like, if you don't know what it is, you probably don't have one. So it was nice learning a little bit more about what that is, and when you get one, when you need one, and how it helps clarify and distinguish those records, especially with common names. It sounds like.
Right.
Well, we have some pre-submitted questions. So for anybody watching this who has questions, we always get a lot of questions during this stream, and there's a lot of stuff that's gonna come up just as we go through presentation, stuff like that. But we always send out an email ahead of the stream. FLP members get it first, just asking you to register for the event. It's a free event, obviously. So the registration is more just so that you have a chance to get your question covered in the live stream. So we always give those priority. And then we get to some of the other ones that are submitted live as well. So we're going to go ahead and power through some of those pre-submitted questions, and it may answer some other similar questions as well. So Tim asks, to what extent does this information get expunged, and how far back does it go? So when something's removed from your record, I guess, what exactly is getting removed, and to what detail?
Yeah. So to what extent does the information get expunged? So I know how to answer that question, at least for Michigan, right? So I would assume that most states probably are operating in the same way. It's a total seal of your criminal record. That means that literally nobody in the world can see it but yourself. You can always go look and peek at your criminal record, but what happens literally in the courthouse is they take your documents and they stow them away in a private drawer that nobody's allowed to open. And usually, to add further, if you have no other crimes, they would actually also destroy your fingerprint cards. You know, if you're arrested at some point, I'm sure you got your fingerprints taken down. Some states even call to get those erased completely. So if you get your criminal record successfully expunged, you could, at least in the state of Michigan, lawfully say you have not been charged with that crime. So totally invisible to the public.
Wow, that's awesome. And it's just for that one crime, that one
Right.
arrest or one conviction, correct?
Right, right. And I see a question here that says, how far back does it go? So you can expunge a crime that, at least in Michigan, that was 100 years ago if you're living that long. The time variable doesn't really matter, right? It's more so how close was it in time, because they require you to wait an X amount of years before you can ask the government and prove good behavior. Hey, I haven't committed a crime. Most
Okay.
states will require 7, 8, or even 10 years before you're even eligible for an expungement.
Got it. Got it. And that varies quite a bit state to state, or is it pretty consistent?
I would say it's the time limitation on it is going to be consistent, somewhere between 7 and 10 years. But definitely every state has a whole different procedure. Michigan recently made it, as I said earlier, very, very easy with the automatic expungement.
Okay. Gotcha. Got another question here. Looks like this one's related more to the NICS system. Well, not really the NICS system, more just Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in general, but maybe related to NICS. So what causes the BATF to look into you related to too many purchases in any certain amount of time, like too many at one time?
Right. Okay, that's a great question. So this is something to keep in mind for people, that there's a required form that FFLs have to fill out when, so quote unquote, too many firearms are purchased. This the form we fill out essentially gives them all your information. So before I get into that, I would like to explain a little bit before, so that way everyone understands how, I guess, firearm registration works, right? So nobody knows what firearms you purchase unless your state requires something in addition. Like in Michigan, there's something called a Michigan pistol sales record, which means that if I were to buy a pistol anywhere in Michigan, I must take a little paper to my local police department and then they input that in the state system. That means the state knows who owns it, but not the federal government. So the federal government actually has no clue who purchased what unless what William is asking is triggered. So what typically happens is you apply for, let's just say, a Mossberg Shockwave and a Colt 1911. You throw both of those down on that form and you walk out with them. Nothing, they don't show up in crimes. Nobody questions them. Nobody knows who owns those firearms in reality. Now, let's say that Shockwave turned up in a crime, or maybe it showed up in self-defense where no crime was committed. The police will inventory that firearm and investigate where it came from. And that's called a trace request.
Mm-hmm.
So the police department will write on a piece of paper, submit that to the BATF or NICS. Then NICS will find out who manufactured that, reach out to the manufacturer. Then the manufacturer must report to which distributor that firearm went to. Then the distributor will report to what FFL dealer bought the firearm. And eventually that trace request ends up on my lap if you bought it from my store. And the government says, hey, we have a Mossberg Shockwave that turned up in a crime. Here's a serial number. You must tell us who bought that firearm from you. And you have 24 hours to do so. It's very serious. So knowing that in mind, knowing that the government does not know what firearms you purchase unless they turn up in crimes, you have to watch out for it. And I want everybody to Google this when they go home or when they have the opportunity. It's called Form 3310. Let's see here. It's called Report of Multiple Sale or Other Disposition of Pistols and Revolvers. The key word there was pistols and revolvers. So, and I will get into the exception. So for the most part, for almost every state, you can buy as many long guns as you want, and there's no mandatory reporting by an FFL dealer. The exception to that is any neighboring state to Mexico. So our southern border. So let's just say Texas. If you buy 2 or more long guns in Texas, the FFL must report to the federal government. And that's because the federal government is afraid of firearm trafficking. So for any state not bordering Mexico, you can buy as many long guns as you want, and the federal government will never know more information. So for those of you that have actually pulled up the Form 3310, keep this in mind when you're buying 2 or more pistols in the time period that they say, and I believe it's 7 days. So
okay, yeah, that was about to be my next question, because I know you can purchase up to, what is it, up to 5 different firearms on a regular 4473. So I didn't know if it was on the same form within a time limit.
So that's a good question, actually, that you raised, plenty. Actually, you can put as many firearms as you want on the form. What happens is most forms only show 5 slots, but what ends up happening is a continuing page. We're allowed to jot down on a separate piece of paper and continue the list. I've had people come in the past and buy maybe 7 or 8 firearms, and it's literally an additional piece of paper that comes out. So Form 3310, though, says if you buy 2 or more handguns, or I should say pistols or revolvers within a certain amount of time, I must give the federal government your name, your address, all the information, the information off your ID, your ID number, the state ID, your date of birth, essentially everything. At that point, what the government does is they use it to kind of dig in on an investigation if they must, right? So by no means will they act on every form, right? But I've seen them call me back and say, hey, I want to know why Mr. Smith purchased 7 pistols. Did he tell you anything during his interaction? They will follow up at some point in certain situations. So as long as you stay away from, and I don't quote me on this, it's either 5 business days or 7 business days. And that's based on the FFL's opening. Let's see here. Transaction includes additional firearms. Okay, here it is. So 5 consecutive business days. So that's based on your FFL. So if you were to purchase 1 firearm from me and then go down the street and buy another handgun, I should say, let's track back a little bit. If you were to purchase 1 pistol from my store and then 15 minutes later you go to the next store, there's no requirement there because it's from the same gun store within a 5 business day period. And that's the 5 business days of your FFL. So if your FFL is closed on Saturday and Sunday, don't count those days. So uh, definitely, if you want to keep security and you don't want the federal government to know what you purchased, then I advise you not to purchase 2 or more pistols in a 5 consecutive business day period. I hope that makes sense. I know there's a lot of information, but
Yeah.
the one thing I want you guys all to take away is watch out for those pistols on the same day or within the 5 business days. Because if you were to purchase a pistol from me today, today's Thursday, and I'm open 7 days a week, you come back on Monday and buy another pistol, you're within that 5 days. And I must put both of those firearms on that form and submit it to the ATF.
Gotcha. Well, you just answered what my next question, if that goes to the ATF or if that goes to FBI NICS.
It goes to both, actually. So I must
okay.
report, and more importantly, even goes to local police. So I have to send 2 copies, one to the local law enforcement official. So it would be the chief of police in the city, or if you have a county or state policing your city, you'd have to send one to them and then one to NICS, which in turn shares that with the local ATF agents in your area. And again, I want to stress that not every purchase is investigated. I would say the fair share of majority aren't. They don't pursue only when things are suspicious. So maybe you had 5 or 6 multiple purchases all over the country, or all over the state, I should say, in the last 3 weeks. They might be more concerned, and that's when they'll probably assign an agent to come knock on your door, and what they call is a welfare check.
Gotcha. Okay. Got another question from John, also related to the NICS process. So does the NICS process in any way register a firearm or provide a trail of firearm ownership? So this is kind of what you just talked about, but a little more specific.
That's interesting. John, thank you for that question. It relates right into the one I had from William. So the trail of firearm ownership is actually you nailed it right there. So all that happens is the trail, right? Like I said earlier, if it's found in a crime, they're going to do the trace. Start from the manufacturer, so they go straight to Mossberg, like in my example, down to the distributor, down to the FFL, down to whoever bought it. And then at that point, they usually pause, because if you were to private sell it, now they're not going to have that information, who bought it. So you would probably get a call and say, hey, that Mossberg that you purchased ended up in a crime. Do you know anything about it? You might say, hey, no, I sold that gun 4 years ago. That's why it's good to keep records of who you sell things to.
Yeah.
Because, at some point, they might decide to charge you if they don't believe you, right? And you didn't leave any records or any proof that you lawfully sold the firearm to whoever you sold it to. So to answer John's question, it's the trail of firearm ownership, I should say.
Yeah, for anybody interested in more information, we did a whole other previous episode related to firearm transfers and what you should put on a bill of sale. So if you want to go look through past webinars, that may be helpful. So in some states it's required, in most places it's not, but it's always just good to have a record of, what was sold to whom and when. So I think that's related to that. I think we're going to take just a quick second to just go on a little bit of a different subject. I saw a post earlier from Anne, who is a brand new FLP member. She said it's her first day as an FLP member. So welcome, Anne. I know we have new members. We have members who have been here a long, long time. And we have constantly or frequently upgraded our benefits, changed our plans around a little bit. So it's good to have a refresher every once in a while just to go through what benefits, like expungements that we talked about earlier, come with your FLP plan. So everybody hang tight. We're going to go through this for just a minute, remind you of some of those benefits that you get with FLP. If you have friends or family who need protection, there's going to be a link down in the bottom right now and through the rest of the webinar that you can click on. We're going to go through those benefits, then we're going to get back to some more questions. Firearms Legal Protection offers protection plans for individuals and for families. For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to look at our most common membership, which is available in most states. Some states do have exceptions. Our individual basic membership comes with protection in your state of residence. It also comes with uncapped payment of attorney fees for defense of criminal and civil cases. This protection extends to all legal weapons.
The individual basic plan also comes with defense of extreme risk protection orders, otherwise known as red flag laws. It also includes access to our 24/7 emergency attorney answered hotline and access to the MyFLP mobile application. We recently added expungement of criminal records on non-conviction incidents to all plans. All plans also include access to digital content and special discounts for FLP members. The individual premium plan comes with all the benefits of the basic plan, plus payment of bail bond premium, payment of expert witness fees, payment of private investigator fees, coordination of counseling support, payment of lost wages if needed during trial, and also incident scene cleanup if that's needed in your case. The family premium plan comes with all the exact same benefits as the individual premium plan, but it extends to your spouse and to any minor children. We define minor children as those 17 and below living with you. Whichever plan you feel is right for you or your family, make sure to use the link in the description of this video to get a special discount on your legal protection. If you have friends and family who are also needing protection, feel free to share that link. Now, let's get back to the presentation.
So it's good to go through those benefits and have a reminder every once in a while, because expungements, regardless of what plan level you've signed up for, maybe you've got the full family plan, maybe you just want the individual basic, but that's a benefit that we offer to all FLP members. And it looks like we've got another question related to expungements from Tova. So this one is a Texas specific one. So if you can answer it in the context of Texas, awesome. If not, if we need to look at it more generally, that's fine too. We can all learn something. So what can be expunged in the state of Texas, and does it matter if the offense happened in another state over 10 years ago? How can you pull your record to see what, if anything, is on there? So this is really 3 questions in one, related to, I guess, state by state. Where does it happen? What can be expunged? And then how can I check up on it?
Sure. So I'm not familiar with Texas expungement laws. So just to answer that question very briefly, again, most states operate pretty similarly. You're going to have to, I see that 10 years ago, so that's good. That if Texas does allow for expungements, you've, in my opinion, satisfied the time requirement to apply. So I see you're also asking questions, does it matter if the offense happened in another state? So I guess if you got to go to the state that charged you to get that expunged. So if from what I'm understanding is you committed an offense in another state but was charged in Texas, if that's true, then Texas will be the state to expunge that crime. The state where the offense happened likely does not have any record of you committing a crime, since you are likely to only be charged once. Otherwise, there's constitutional issues that might arise. But don't get me wrong, sometimes there's crimes that can be committed in multiple states, and yes, you can be charged in multiple states. So expungements, you have to, it's on a state by state basis. So you must go to each state that you committed a crime and were convicted of it and ask for the expungement. As far as how you could pull records, that's definitely a question that you will need to ask the state police department. I know in Michigan, Michigan.gov, for example, it's called something silly. It's called iChat. I'm not sure why they came up with that name. It looks like iPhone, undercase I, capital CHAT. That's in Michigan. I can pull my own criminal record and see what's on there. I'm not sure about Texas. I'm not sure about other states. Definitely, every state has their own unique way of pulling your record. Typically, though, it's pretty cheap. You do have to pay. Like in Michigan, it's 10 or 15 bucks, and they'll print out your whole record instantly. You put in a couple qualifying questions, and bam, you got it in your email. So definitely please consult a local attorney and ask that question. You would be better suited and get a better response for sure.
Okay. And so it varies state by state, but it's pretty simple, almost like pulling a background check or a credit report, but it's always through a state entity. It's not released to private organizations.
Yeah, so private organizations are at privy of the information if you're kind of giving them permission, right? Like if you are applying to a job at Tesla and you kind of sign off that they're going to pull your record, they can lawfully do it. There has to be a lawful purpose to pull your record. Typically, it's the facts of the case are public, at least in Michigan. Like I could go to the courthouse tomorrow and ask about Jane Doe and figure out what she did 18 years ago. It's public record until it's expunged. So As far as though your official criminal record, usually, at least in Michigan, I know, you must have a lawful purpose. It's pretty relaxed though. You're kind of self-certifying in Michigan that you have a lawful purpose. So when clients hire me, it's easy for me to say I have a lawful purpose. I check the box and say I'm retained counsel. My client has paid me and hired me to pull his or her record, and that's pretty much where it ends. So definitely all state by state basis.
Gotcha. Okay. Next question we've got is from Roosevelt. So, how to have mental illness removed from your name when you have never had any mental illness issue? Well, so first, my guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing we're specifically talking about 4473 here. We're not talking about other records. And I believe their terminology is what adjudicated mentally defective. So it's not necessarily something from a doctor or something like it's an actual legal status, right?
Right. So that's concerning that there would be something stopping you if you don't suffer from any mental illness or you haven't been adjudicated as mentally ill. Definitely try to find a source of that record. If you do the appeal or like I was speaking about earlier, the government will actually show you what they see. So you can kind of tell where the source is. I know it can be difficult to find sources of records all the time. People call me and say, I have an outstanding violation. I just don't remember what city I was crossing through. It does pose a challenge oftentimes to figure out where something's standing. There's like no magic system you could plug in and it'll tell you exactly where something outstanding. So if you order that record or if you do the appeal, I should say, the government actually orders your records and they'll show you like Ottawa County in California submitted this record and said you were mentally adjudicated on September 14th of 2006. And so at that point, you will have the opportunity, or the lawyer will have the opportunity to refute it. You can go down to the Ottawa County and tell them, hey, where's this record that you're submitting to the government? And they could probably say, oh, that's a mistake. Didn't mean to go to you. Clear it off your name. And then you go prove that to the federal government. And that's how you essentially remove it from your name. It's not easy. It can be challenging.
Well, that's concerning and painful that something like that could just be basically dropped on the wrong person. And that could be pretty scary, but it's great that there at least is a process to go rectify that and appeal that and get it corrected fairly quickly.
Absolutely.
Next question. This one gets a bit specific. So Stephen asks, can a DUI restriction on a driver's license be removed in Minnesota? I have three. The last one was in 2001. It's a misdemeanor, and I'm being penalized for life for a misdemeanor.
Okay, good stuff. And this is a good question. So I just want to first very generally say again that everything's on a state-by-state basis. So I'm more adapt to Michigan law. But what I do want to let you know is typically reoccurring, or they call them habitual offenders, typically fall off the grid when it comes to being eligible for expungement. Because at the end of the day, when you're asking to get something expunged, you're trying to tell the government, hey, I had one bad night. And that's a common phrase. If you search expungement, one bad night, it's a principle that most states follow. They say, hey, we shouldn't penalize Jane Doe for the rest of her life because she had one bad night. We should allow for these expungements. So not to say that some states don't do it. I'm not sure about Minnesota, but I've seen definitely some states allow for the expungement of 2 or even 3 criminal acts. But usually the principle that these states like to follow, again, is the one bad night example. So if I had to tell you without researching Minnesota law, I would say that odds are not necessarily in your favor, but there's definitely hope. And I would definitely consult a Minnesota attorney about that.
Gotcha. Question from John. So why can't we institute a policy or effort to show the number of lives that are saved by the ability of a legal person carrying a gun? Well, from a marketing and statistician's point of view, I love the premise. I love the premise. It'd be wonderful to be able to show that, but I struggle with it a little bit because so often you're trying to count incidents of things that didn't happen rather than trying to count the number of like so often the presence of a gun deters a crime And so therefore there is no crime that's committed. So therefore you can't measure it. That's my take on it, but I want to hear yours. I'm interested.
Right. So that's a good question. Oftentimes we hear news about an unfortunate shooting that occurred, but rarely do we ever hear good news about how an individual stopped a mass shooter. Like, for example, in malls, I've heard of it recently where somebody recently stopped one. But I tend to notice that the news doesn't like really go into detail on it, right? It's not going to become breaking news, and it's not going to be plastered on every single billboard, and it's not going to generate a auto text alert to your phone. It's usually bad news that makes the news, and that's because from what I've noticed, and I've had my fair share of news interviews, they like to hear what's catchy, right? So things that fear you, the news likes to cover that because they got your attention, right?
Yeah.
That's
If it
kind of the
bleeds, it
direction
leads.
we're going. Yeah. Now, for all the interviews I've been through, I could say that the news agencies that have covered me and any of my issues that I've raised have really done a good job at reporting. It's very important, I guess, to understand what goes behind the scenes because you hear what the reporters are saying and what they're doing off camera, right? And it does, from my experience, it did match kind of the story and the narrative that they were telling. So, unfortunately, I don't think the current political climate would agree with what John's saying. We're in a more restrictive climate now where we're trying to make it harder for people to own firearms. We're raising issues that we've never raised before. You kind of see the firearm right stuff in the news almost every day now. And
Yeah.
just today, Michigan announced that Whitmer is ready, which is our governor. She's ready to
Literally a question just dropped in here. Yeah, you're on it.
Yep. So she's ready to sign that. We got the news today, and I can touch on red flag laws very briefly. They're very scary because you're essentially giving power to a police officer to take away your firearms before you're even charged with a crime. So typically, the Constitution says nobody can seize your property really until there's some sort of suspicion or some sort of evidence that you've committed a crime. Red flag laws pretty much allow somebody like my neighbor to go to the police station and say, "Hey, the guy next door to me, I've been seeing him play with a lot of guns in his garage. I'm not sure if he's all there. You guys should go check him out." He might not be telling the truth. The cops come to me, they act on a red flag law, and they take my weapons away. And I did nothing wrong. And now I have to fight to prove I did nothing wrong. So it can stop a lot of it could create a lot of issues, I should say, and I'm not a fan of them at all. So I know in Michigan they were talking about hyping up I guess, making it a felony if you falsely report. So if my neighbor went to the police and lied intentionally to get me to get my guns taken away, I guess they're trying to make it a felony. They're saying that's the band-aid to the issue. So, oh, don't worry if someone's going to falsely report you because we're going to have harsh penalties if they do. I'm not buying that entirely. So definitely is very concerning to me. And I believe over 20 states are doing it already. So Michigan's just adding to that list.
Yeah, and I'm in Texas down here, and we don't have it yet, but it's one of those things that almost every legislative session somebody's proposing it, and it's just slowly and steadily creeping its way across the entire country. And you're exactly right that it's scary because it absolutely circumvents the idea of due process. It's a Second Amendment issue. It's a Fourth Amendment issue. You're not really facing your accuser in a traditional sense. There's so many legal issues with it. And that's why firearms legal protection was actually the first one in this space to provide protection of red flag laws.
And that's huge.
That process is going to vary a little bit state by state. And we did a whole webinar on that in the past. And it was an attorney in Colorado who's fighting a lot of this stuff. So go back, look for that one if you guys want to learn more about that. It was with James Cook talking about red flag laws and how FLP can step in on your behalf if you ever have one of these extreme risk protection orders filed against you, separating you from your weapons. Scary stuff, man.
It is. It is very concerning to me. So we'll see how this plays out. I know it's going to change the climate a lot. So I know that firearms legal protection, we saw the product in our CPL classes. I authored the legal portion of my CPL class. I mean, I love FLP. I've vetted so many companies, and I was so comfortable when I saw your product. It really does beat everybody else. It's not even close. And that's my understanding of things from a legal perspective. And it's very important. You know, the one thing that sticks out to my mind is that when you call, like, let's just say the competitors, when you make that initial call, you're not necessarily speaking to an attorney. Everything you
Yeah.
say on the conversation can be pulled in from the prosecutor. And guess what? You're judged on statements you say that you might have not meant. When people are in a panic and a bind, you tend to overtalk and say things that you don't necessarily mean. So with FOP, it's different. You know, if you speak to an attorney right away, it's attorney-client privilege. The prosecutor isn't pulling that statement in. So I love your product, Plenty. It's amazing. So I I have nothing but amazing things to say. I'm a proud holder as well. If I were ever involved, and hopefully it never happens, if I'm ever involved in a self-defense situation, I'm getting representation. It's too costly on myself. As being an attorney, I'm saying that it's way too costly to pause my life to
Yeah.
represent myself. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to afford it. So just knowing that I have that behind my back really is comforting.
Well, and so many people are signing up every day for exactly those reasons. And it's one of those things that in some ways is kind of like a fire extinguisher. It's something that you hope you never need to use, but you sure are glad you have it,
Right.
because every day a house is burned down. Every day incidents happen. And we hope and pray that it's not us, not anybody we know. But should you need that protection, wonderful to have it. I just saw another comment come through. Well, if you are a gun owner, don't tell everyone you have one. I get that. I get wanting to be a little bit more private. Absolutely get and respect that. But I think there's also, with a lot of this stuff, like, if it's a constitutional right to be a gun owner, like, you don't have to hide. You don't have to. I understand if you're making people uncomfortable, and do
Right.
what's polite, do what's respectful, but we shouldn't always be on the defensive and having to run and hide and kind of cow down to this kind of
Right.
stuff.
I mean, there's definitely circumstances like I wouldn't want to go to a supermarket and open carry with kids around, elderly people. Some people are just become afraid because they don't know who you are, and I guess that's
Yeah,
their right. So definitely there are situations where I want to hide that I'm a firearm holder, but I don't want to run away and hide forever. There's certain circumstances that I should be able to say I do and show it with comfort. So I do agree with that statement to a certain extent, but we shouldn't be locked down and hiding forever, right? There should be
yeah,
a comforting zone for us.
yeah. I have one more question related to NICS checks. So I have a Texas LTC, and I know a lot of other states are like this as well. So when I get my carry permit in my state, I now don't have to do a NICS check for every individual purpose, because I've already done that and an even more thorough process. I've been fingerprinted, which you're not for NICS checks. I've done a more thorough process so I can get to skip that step when I purchase a firearm. Can you explain a little bit about how that works, how prevalent that is in different states, and just kind of educate us on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So the federal government created an exception to NICS at some point in time. They said that if the state system, whatever it may be, like DC, like having that concealed pistol license, if the state system is essentially a little more strict than they are, then it kind of substitutes it, right? So a lot of states have that exception. Unfortunately, Michigan used to be one of them, and I believe it was in 2016. The federal government disagreed with Michigan and said, "We don't think your standards are more strict.
Hmm.
So, hey, Michigan residents, you guys all have to do NICS background checks again." So, Michigan has not changed their applications since then. So, as an FFL holder and CPR, concealed pistol license holder, I have to still run a NICS check myself, even though
Oh,
I
wow.
can turn the
Yeah.
key in my store, grab any firearm. At the end of the day, if I'm buying one, I have to go sit down and fill out a 4473, even though I'm an FFL holder and a CPL holder. So it's really state by state dependent. If your state has that, definitely take advantage. Don't run that NICS background check. Don't put yourself through that extra work. Use your concealed pistol license or CCW, whatever your state calls it, as a substitute, and it's totally legal and totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've definitely walked into firearms retailers in Texas, and they're looking, the shop's closing, they're looking at their watch, like, yeah, can we do one more? And then you pull out the carry permit and like, oh, come on.
Yeah,
No problem.
we don't have the luxury of that in Michigan,
Mm.
unfortunately. So I hope one day they bring it back. I don't say I agree with the government. Really, what the government was worried about is the way that your concealed pistol license is taken away if you do commit a crime. In Michigan, we kind of get a letter that says, hey, you got to forfeit it. You got to shred your document. We have no way of scanning a CCW or CPL to see if it's still valid in Michigan. Maybe that's why they did that. So maybe in Texas, they actually require you to come down to the department and hand it over in 3 days, or you'll be written up for some sort of crime. So that's what the federal government has been after, is what happens if someone commits a crime that disqualifies them from owning a firearm after that record has been issued. So in Michigan, apparently we have weak confiscation laws because, again, an FFL has no way of scanning. Like in Michigan, it says your name and that's it, pretty much. Name, address, and expiration. They have no barcode to scan to see if it's still valid. So that's why I believe they did away with the waiver in Michigan.
Got it. Well, that makes sense, I guess.
Right. Yeah, it really does. I agree with it to some extent. Although I wish it didn't, but I think if your state has a stronger way of verifying your CPL before that happens, then we should be exempting NICS on those transactions for sure. Yeah.
Well, I've seen it happen, not even related to carry permits or government licensing, but even something as simple as, heck, I've seen FLP members proudly show off their card and then they forgot, oh, wait, that Visa card's expired. I forgot to put on my other card. I'm actually not protected right now. So it's like being able to have continuity of records, whether it's a government permit or something like your FLP membership or your Netflix subscription, makes a difference.
Right. Oh, definitely. And other common questions that I get all the time too, just because you talked about that, is having that valid document that you bring to your 4473. So it needs to show your name and the state of or where you reside. So a lot of people come to me and present an ID or a driver's license and say, my address on the front's not valid. I moved 6 months ago. I haven't had time to go update it. Unfortunately, I can't sell it anymore unless they provide a subsequent document that says, hey, I reside here. And it has to be something issued by a government entity. So I can't take a random piece of paper that says you live somewhere. Usually a car title, car registration, maybe an unemployment record, things that are printed from the government and mailed to that address. So definitely make sure that if you guys ever want to buy firearms, you're updating your addresses on your IDs, just so you don't have to run through that problem. We probably have to turn away 15 or 20% of the transactions. It's pretty common. People just don't like going to their DMVs or Secretary of States and updating their records, but that will definitely prevent you from getting a firearm. And you don't want to wait until it's too late, right? If you need to buy something, you want to be able to walk in, grab what you need and walk out. So do make sure that you guys update your records so that way that doesn't get in the way.
That's a great point. And because nobody likes going to the DMV, but you know what? My joy and appreciation of firearms exceeds my dislike for the DMV. So keep all your stuff in order. Well, that's awesome.
Definitely.
Well, anything else related to background checks or expungements that you want to bring up this evening?
Just a couple points. It's always good, again, to stress the importance of record keeping. So if you ever were to buy a firearm, do keep a record where you purchased it from, on what day. If it comes down to that trace, like I was saying earlier, you want to be able to tell the government immediately who you sold it to, what day. It clears you, right? I see so many people calling me and getting concerned, like, hey, I got a call from an agent and they said that the Springfield Hellcat I bought 3 years ago turned up in a crime, but I sold it to somebody 2 years ago at a police station. I don't know their name. Can you help me? And then they're kind of worried, right? So record keeping is so important. I can't stress the importance.
Great point.
That's the one thing, if I had to recommend for everyone's security and safety out there, for sure, in that realm. And as far as expungements and any other questions anybody might have related to NICS, if you've been denied, delayed, and you want to chit chat with me, you can literally go www.firearmsappeal.com. It's one word, firearmsappeal.com. And you could drop your name, number, and for the next number, if you don't have one, you could just put NA, not applicable, submit it. I'll follow up in a phone call with you if I do get a fair amount. Give me a little time. I will call. I will talk to you. I'll be more than happy to answer questions. Even if you're not interested in hiring me, if you have a couple follow-up questions, more than happy to do it. Also, Plenty, if you put up my email address in the slide you just put up, Ramy at akkings.com, Ramy at akkings.com. My cell phone number is also listed right there. I do ask that if you have any questions, you can feel free to text me. I'm more than happy to answer those questions. It is pretty late at night now, so please don't call me. Do feel free though, send an email, send a text, no problem. I'm here to help you guys, and I love FLP. Thank you, Plenty, and your organization for organizing this. Giving education to people is so important. Misinformation out there is rampant, and so anything I could do to help, I'm there for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I know viewers out there learned a lot, and these are topics that just expungements, background checks, they're not the sexiest topics ever, but they're really important, and it's really great to learn about them from an expert like you. So Ramy, thank you so much for helping us learn about these topics. And for all the members out there, remember, join FLP. If you protect yourself, we'll protect you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Plenty. Good night, everyone. I appreciate you.